I didn't expect much when I pulled up to my daughter's house that afternoon. Just a quick stop, a simple errand, nothing more. But fate doesn't ask for permission before it rips your life wide open. I left the engine running, thinking I'd be back in a minute. Then I saw something that made my chest tighten. The car parked outside, the one that should have been in my garage, not here. My feet moved before my brain did. A few steps closer, and I heard voices. Familiar ones. Too familiar. What they were saying didn't just sting, it hollowed me out. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't just stumbled into a conversation. I'd walked straight into a betrayal years in the making. If you've ever had everything shift under your feet in a single breath, then this story is for you. Tap like, hit subscribe if you've ever trusted the wrong people, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because what you're about to hear, it stays with you. I wasn't supposed to be there. Melissa had told me she'd be out of town all weekend at a leadership retreat for her firm, and Scott, her husband, had a mountain of legal briefs to catch up on. I had no reason to stop by, really, but after grabbing a bite at Henderson's Diner and with some time to kill before the oil change, I figured I'd drop off the garden shears she'd borrowed last month. Harmless, unannounced. Just a quick fatherly errand. That was until I turned onto Willow Lane and saw it. Linda's car, bold and unmistakable. Silver BMW 5 Series. Vanity plate LIN 67. My stomach tightened instantly. She hadn't mentioned seeing Melissa today. In fact, she'd left the house in her yoga gear, saying she had a class followed by a coffee date with her book club friend Gina. Yet there was her car, parked like it belonged there. My instinct wasn't suspicion at first. It was confusion. I double-checked the time, 3:42 p.m., and pulled over across the street. I sat in my truck, engine idling, staring at the driveway. Something about it didn't sit right. I turned off the ignition, opened the door quietly, and stepped out. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But something deeper, heavier, was building in my chest, an intuition sharpened by 35 years of running a business and 47 years of reading people. I crossed the lawn slowly, sticking to the edge where the grass was thick and quiet. The living room window was slightly cracked, and that's when I heard them. At first, it was just the low murmur of voices. Then a clear sentence drifted out that turned my blood cold. When he signs the papers, everything gets divided down the middle, said a man's voice, Scott. You'll have the house, the cabin, the annuity, and spousal support on top. It's all lined up. My breath caught in my throat. I crouched just beneath the window ledge, phone already in hand, thumb hovering over the record button. Then came Linda's voice, smooth and sweet like honey laced with arsenic. He has no clue. He thinks I'm still interested in his little weather updates and boring construction stories. All I have to do is ask how his day was and act like I care. That's it. The record button clicked under my thumb. Her laughter floated out, light and familiar, but now it sounded like a stranger's voice. 29 years, she continued, and the man still doesn't know when he's being played. It's almost sad. Not sad, Scott replied. It's useful. Frank's loyal to a fault. That's why this will work. I leaned in closer, hand bracing against the side of the house, heart pounding so loud I was afraid they'd hear it. The documents are ready, Scott said. Divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences. Based on Iowa law, you're entitled to half of all marital assets acquired over the course of the marriage. And with the financial dependency angle, long-term spousal support is almost guaranteed. I'll file Monday. Linda exhaled, satisfied. And the accounts? Already documented, Scott assured her. Checking, savings, investments, the trust fund. Everything's been quietly copied. We even have a record of his offshore accounts from that business trip he bragged about 2 years ago. The Belize setup? Got it. Good, Linda said coolly. Let him think he's the king of his empire for one more weekend. Just then, I shifted my weight and stepped on a twig. The crack was sharp and sudden. The living room fell instantly silent. "Did you hear that?" Linda asked. "Probably a squirrel," Scott said after a pause, but his tone wavered. "Or a nosy neighbor. No one's supposed to be home," she hissed. "Relax," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. Even if someone's out there, they didn't hear anything useful. And even if they did, who would believe them over us? I pulled back, ducked low, and moved along the hedge, careful to stay hidden. I got back to my truck with legs that didn't feel like mine, hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. I replayed the last minute of the recording just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. But no, it was all there, clear as day. My wife of 29 years and my son-in-law plotting to take everything I built while I was still alive and loving both of them. I sat behind the wheel for a long time before turning the key. I didn't drive home immediately. I drove nowhere in particular, just wandered the familiar roads of our town, thinking, processing, remembering. Every anniversary card, every birthday dinner, every "I love you" spoken in the dark. Was any of it ever real? By the time I pulled into our driveway, dusk had settled. The lights were off. I stepped inside and looked around. The house I'd built with my own hands, the staircase I had sanded, the cabinets I had installed, the sunroom I designed just because Linda said she liked light, suddenly felt foreign. I sat there with the engine running, my mind flipping through memories that suddenly felt like fiction. The anniversary trip to Santa Fe, where Linda cried when I surprised her with the antique necklace. The family barbecues. The times I caught her just looking at me and smiling, and I'd thought it was love. It wasn't. It was calculation. A long con stretched over 3 decades. I finally killed the engine and pulled out my phone, hit play again, and listened to Scott's voice in that smug attorney tone of his, detailing how they'd already documented every major asset. "We've got the properties, the stocks, the offshore Belize account," he'd said. "It's all categorized. She's entitled to half under Iowa law. And the spousal support. Well, let's just say Frank's long work hours and her lack of recent employment history actually help us here." My hands trembled with rage. So that was the plan. Use my loyalty, my hard work, my sense of duty as weapons against me. The worst part wasn't that Linda had fallen out of love. That happens to people. The worst part was that she had stayed, smiled, cooked dinner, laid beside me for years, all while secretly digging her claws deeper into my wallet. I opened the Notes app on my phone and started typing a list. A long, cold, businesslike list. All joint assets. The Des Moines house. The lake cabin. The commercial property near Glenview. The retirement accounts. My coal petroleum shares. Then I added another column, protected assets. Assets she didn't know about. Hidden reserves. Quietly managed accounts I'd set up years ago for tax optimization. Trusts and other names. I wasn't stupid. I hadn't built a company from a gas station and one delivery truck into a 7-figure regional operation by trusting everyone who smiled at me. I made backups, contingency plans for emergencies. And this was the biggest damn emergency I'd ever faced. I drove home around 7. The sky was dark, the porch lights on, and Linda's BMW was back in our driveway like it hadn't just been part of a crime scene. She was inside, probably sipping wine, watching one of those home renovation shows she liked, pretending everything was normal. I didn't go in right away. I sat outside for 15 minutes, breathing through the tightness in my chest, reminding myself not to explode. I needed clarity. I needed her to keep thinking I didn't know. Let them keep playing their little game. Because the more they moved, the more evidence I could gather. When I stepped through the door, she looked up from the couch and smiled. "Hey, honey, you were out late." Her voice was smooth as ever. I forced a chuckle. Ran into a few snags at the shop. Had dinner at Henderson's. "Oh," she said, "I had leftovers. I saved you some lasagna." I thanked her, walked into the kitchen, and opened the fridge. The smell of her lasagna hit me in the face and nearly made me gag. I'd always said her lasagna was the best part of coming home. Now it tasted like betrayal. After dinner, I retreated to my study and pulled out the fireproof safe where I kept hard copies of all business documents. Contracts, deeds, valuations. Everything Scott had probably told her was already copied. Fine. They wanted to document everything? I'd do them one better. I'd organize it all for them with my own additions. Every business decision I'd made in the last 10 years had been logged, dated, witnessed, and in many cases notarized. Linda had no idea how many of our assets weren't technically marital. Some were inherited. Some were held in corporate entities. Others were purchased through trusts she wasn't listed on. She thought she was about to walk away with half of $22 million. She didn't know that a good chunk of it wasn't even legally accessible to her. I spent the next 3 hours preparing a digital copy of all relevant financial documents. Then I emailed them to my private cloud server and saved them onto an encrypted flash drive I hid inside a hollowed-out socket cover behind my desk. At midnight, I finally came to bed. Linda was already asleep, breathing slow and soft, her wedding ring glinting in the dark like a snake curled on her finger. I lay beside her staring at the ceiling, wondering how long this had been going on. How long had she and Scott been grooming each other for this betrayal? Was it just business, or had it crossed into something else? I didn't want to know, and yet I did, because every answer gave me more leverage. The next morning, I left before sunrise. I wasn't going to work. I was going to meet Darren, my CPA of 19 years, the only man besides me who knew where every dollar really lived. He was waiting at the diner booth when I walked in, a cup of black coffee in hand, and that furrowed accountant expression he always wore when numbers didn't add up. "What's going on, Frank?" The truth was, I was doing more than just protecting my business. I was creating a firewall between Linda and everything she thought she'd walk away with. I had Darren begin reclassifying several of our jointly registered properties into layered legal structures, moving assets into protected designations that would tie them up for years in litigation if anyone tried to seize them. Meanwhile, I maintained the exact routine Linda expected. I sent her a quick good morning text, stopped to pick up her favorite muffins, and even left a voicemail saying I'd be home by 6. I needed her comfortable. I needed her unaware. But the opportunity to gather more leverage came faster than I anticipated. That afternoon, I got a call from Melissa. She sounded distracted. "Hey, Dad. Scott said you dropped something off at the house the other day." I froze. My mind raced. Had she overheard something? Had Linda tried to cover their tracks? "Yeah," I said evenly. "Just some garden tools you asked for. You weren't home, so I left them in the shed." She hesitated, then said, "Scott didn't mention seeing you, but he said Mom dropped by too." I didn't realize they'd spent time together. "Oh," I replied, keeping my voice casual. "Yeah." She didn't say much about it either. Guess they must have crossed paths. Melissa exhaled through the phone, but I caught the note of confusion in her voice. "It's probably nothing," she mumbled. "Anyway, thanks for the tools." "Anytime, sweetheart," I said, and we hung up. My mind was already calculating. If Scott hadn't told Melissa about my visit, that meant they knew I'd been there. And if they hadn't confronted me yet, they were trying to keep the illusion alive. That worked in my favor. I knew Linda's patterns better than she realized. When she felt threatened, she doubled down on charm. She tried to read me, test me, feel out whether I suspected anything. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, right as I pulled into the driveway, she came out to greet me, wearing the soft blue sweater I'd once said made her look 10 years younger. Her makeup was subtle, her smile rehearsed. "Long day?" she asked sweetly. "Long enough," I replied, kissing her on the cheek. "Smells good in there." "Chicken pot pie," she said brightly. "Thought you could use some comfort food." I nodded, trying not to imagine her stirring that filling while planning my financial death. Over dinner, she asked about work, about Melissa, even about Darren. I fed her neutral answers, nothing too detailed, nothing that would raise flags. When she leaned over to pour me more iced tea, I caught the tiniest twitch in her left eye. She was nervous. Good. Let her wonder. After dinner, she followed me into the den, which was unusual. She usually let me decompress alone, but not tonight. She sat on the edge of the recliner, hands folded. "Frank," she began, "is everything okay? You seem distracted lately." I leaned back in my chair and met her gaze. "Just busy. You know how end-of-quarter work gets." She gave a soft laugh. "Yes, but this feels different. I know you. You've been leaving earlier, getting home later. Is something going on at the business?" Her tone was innocent, but her eyes were searching, scanning my face for cracks. I held her gaze. "Nope, just trying to stay ahead of the curve." "Well," she said, touching my arm, "you can talk to me about anything. Always." I nodded, smiling slightly. "I know." She stayed for another minute, then stood and said she was heading to bed. I watched her go, the sway of her hips, the casual grace I used to admire. It wasn't grace anymore. It was a performance. And I just passed the first test. I waited 10 minutes, then pulled out my phone and checked the hidden camera app I'd installed in the den clock the night before. The video had recorded the entire exchange, her expressions, her tone, her body language. I forwarded the file to Darren, who was compiling a full behavioral record for our eventual court defense. I knew Linda wasn't working alone. Scott was coaching her, likely prepping her for future testimony. What they didn't know was that I had already begun assembling my own legal team. That same night, I reached out to Thomas Keyes, a former judge-turned-private family law consultant. He'd known my father, owed me a favor, and had no love for manipulative courtroom tactics. We talked for 2 hours. I played him segments of the recording, laid out the timeline, and shared my notes. By the end, he agreed to help, off the record, to build a case that would ensure the truth didn't just come out, it would leave a crater. The next day, Linda dropped by my office for the first time in months. Said she was in the area and thought she'd surprise me with lunch. She brought sandwiches from the deli I liked, smiled as she placed the bag on my desk, and made small talk while glancing at my schedule board. I watched her eyes trace the calendar, the color-coded meetings. "You've been busy," she noted. "New contract bids." "Some," I answered, staying vague. "Mostly clean-up work before summer projects." "Anyone new on staff?" she asked, casually flipping through a company brochure. "Not really. Same team." "Why?" She shrugged. "Just curious. I've been thinking about volunteering again. Maybe helping with the office picnic this year." "That'd be nice," I said, noting the tremor in her smile. She was fishing, trying to stay in the loop, maybe even looking for evidence that I knew something. But I gave her nothing. She left 10 minutes later, kissing my cheek like always. The second she walked out, I saved the security footage and added it to the growing archive. Later that night, Melissa texted me again. "Hey, Dad, Mom acting weird around you lately?" That night, I sat in the living room alone while Linda was upstairs on one of her usual book club calls. I stared at the fireplace mantel, at the framed photo from our 25th anniversary trip to the Rockies. We look happy. I look happy. But as I studied her face in that picture, I realized something had always been off. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. It had taken me nearly 3 decades to admit what now seems so obvious. I got up and walked to the cabinet where we kept the old photo albums, the ones Linda used to obsess over during the early years. I flipped through one after another, watching time peel back. There was our wedding photo, taken in the backyard of my first home. She wore a pale cream dress, not white. She said white felt too formal for us. I wore a gray suit and a tie she'd picked. She smiled like she was posing for a catalog, And now that I really looked at it, I couldn't find the warmth in her eyes. Our honeymoon photos in Arizona came next. I remembered feeling exhausted during that trip, but Linda had insisted we go right after the ceremony. I chalked her coldness up to wedding stress back then. Now, I wasn't so sure. I turned more pages: Melissa's first birthday, her first Christmas, school plays, summer beach trips. In all of them, Linda looked present, sometimes even radiant. But now that I had context, the moments looked staged. In too many pictures, she was looking at the camera, never at me or Melissa. The camera was always her audience. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat back down, letting the years crash over me like waves. Had I been living inside a story written by someone else? A story where I played the hardworking provider, the devoted husband, the stable anchor, while Linda played the devoted wife until it no longer served her script. I remembered our first real fight, sometime in 1996. I had just expanded my business to 3 gas stations, and I'd spent a whole week on the road managing construction. When I got home, she was cold, distant. Said she felt like she didn't matter anymore. I'd apologized, promised to be more present, even booked a surprise weekend at a spa resort. She seemed thrilled. But now I wondered, was that fight about feelings, or had she already started weighing my value in dollars? I remember the day I gave her full access to our joint financial accounts. It was 2002, and I had just received a major supply contract. She cried, told me it made her feel trusted, like a real partner. I thought I was doing the right thing. She never showed a single sign of misuse back then. But that too could have been strategy. Keep everything clean for the first 15 years so that the last 10 could be the setup. I remembered how she insisted we start attending those community events at the country club, even though I hated them. You need to network, she said. You need to be seen. But it wasn't me who wanted to be seen. It was her. She soaked in the compliments, the attention, the status. I was just the man who funded the lifestyle. I used to love the way she walked into a room, confident, poised. Now I saw it for what it was: performance. Every gracious laugh, every polite comment, every hand placed on my arm in public, it had been a calculated move. I thought about the dinners I cooked when she was tired, the nights I rubbed her back when she said she couldn't sleep, the anniversary notes I wrote by hand because I knew she liked the personal touch. Every gesture I made over 29 years, thinking I was nurturing a life with someone who cared, had been ammunition she stored away for later. Then there was Scott. The audacity of that man to stand in my daughter's home and tell my wife how to dismantle everything I had built. I had welcomed him into my family, paid off part of Melissa's wedding expenses, helped him secure his first legal internship through a client of mine. And now he was using that same knowledge, those same introductions, to orchestrate my downfall. I stared at the family portrait from Melissa's graduation. All 4 of us, standing in front of her university's chapel. Melissa beaming in her gown. Linda holding her hand. Scott with his polished grin. Me in the middle, smiling like a proud father and husband. That image was supposed to be my legacy. Now it felt like evidence from a crime scene. Linda's betrayal wasn't just emotional or financial. It was spiritual. It challenged everything I had believed about marriage, about love, about commitment. And yet, I didn't feel like a victim. Not anymore. I felt like a soldier preparing for war. The memories were no longer weights. They were fuel. Each smile I now saw as fake. Each compliment I now saw as manipulation sharpened my resolve. This was never going to be about winning a court case. This was about reclaiming my name, my worth, my dignity. I opened the drawer in my study and pulled out the folder Darren had sent over that afternoon. Inside were updated valuations of all my properties, investment summaries, and a list of every asset Linda had tried to get access to in the last 6 months. I scanned the dates: April, May, June, She'd been slowly preparing for this for almost a year, asking questions under the guise of curiosity, pushing for access to accounts she'd never cared about before, wanting copies of insurance policies just in case. It had been right in front of me. I just didn't want to see it. Now I saw everything. I spent the next 3 hours printing, annotating, and organizing documents. I created separate folders labeled premarital, joint, and business. I thought about how many things I'd built in this home to suit her preferences. From a flooring to the sunroom to the kitchen island, this house had been her dream. And now she was trying to steal it out from under me. I sat down at the table and started mapping out the next phase. Darren had already completed the initial audit, and the good news was that many of the assets Linda believed were shared weren't technically marital. Some properties had been purchased in my name only using premarital funds. Others were under my LLC, which gave us a legal buffer. Still, we couldn't assume anything. Scott was clever, and he'd use every legal trick he knew to argue gray areas. I had to go further. I opened my phone and made a list of experts, 2 forensic accountants, a litigation consultant, and an estate planning attorney with experience in high-conflict divorces. I reached out to all 4 before 9 a.m., using direct lines and encrypted email, making sure no trace of these communications could be intercepted. I explained enough to get their attention, keeping the full details for in-person meetings. My story, unfortunately, was familiar to them. The only twist was the involvement of a son-in-law orchestrating it. That got their attention. By midday, my calendar was packed with back-to-back consultations starting Monday. I wasn't wasting time. At noon, I headed to Coal Petroleum's headquarters. On the surface, I conducted business as usual, reviewing quarterly reports, meeting with regional managers, approving the bid proposal for the Cedar Rapids expansion. But behind closed doors, I called a meeting with my executive assistant, my HR director, and the head of IT. I initiated new protocols for information security and internal access. I instructed them to restrict all file sharing permissions to senior-level staff only and to require 2-factor authentication for all logins. I also told them that any financial documents, client data, or legal correspondence would now be routed through my office first. I made it clear this was a precaution due to a pending audit, not something they needed to panic over. They accepted it without question. I'd earned their trust over 30 years, and I wasn't about to squander that now. As I left the office, I passed by the break room and saw the photo of me and Linda that used to hang in my private suite, now relocated to a communal space. I stared at it for a beat. That image no longer represented a marriage. It represented a brand that needed protecting from a scandal brewing beneath the surface. At 4 p.m., I met with Marcus Webb, an old friend and a seasoned asset protection attorney. We sat in a quiet corner of the Blue Oak Grill, away from prying eyes. I laid out the facts without embellishment. Linda's betrayal, the conspiracy with Scott, the recording, and the pre-divorce maneuvering. Marcus leaned back, sipped his coffee, and said, "You're lucky you caught this early. Most men don't. You're not just defending assets now, Frank. You're preparing for war." He advised me to transfer any vulnerable liquid assets into irrevocable trusts immediately and to update all beneficiary designations to exclude Linda. He also recommended drafting an affidavit detailing everything I'd uncovered so far, including behavioral shifts, financial activity, and the exact content of the recording. This document, signed and dated, would become a cornerstone of our defense. I agreed without hesitation. By the time I got home, it was nearly 7 o'clock. Linda was in the kitchen, wearing an apron and humming, as if she hadn't been plotting to dismantle my life 3 days earlier. "Hey there," she said brightly. "I thought I'd try that lemon chicken recipe you like." I smiled and nodded, my face practiced now in the art of performance. Smells great. Over dinner, she brought up Melissa again. She called today, Linda said, chewing slowly. She sounded distant. I shrugged. Maybe she's just tired. Work's been intense lately. Linda studied me for a moment, then asked, "Are you sure nothing's going on?" I held her gaze. "I'm sure." She nodded, seemingly satisfied, but I saw the flicker of doubt. Let her doubt. Let her second guess every word out of my mouth. After dinner, she excused herself to shower, and I returned to my study, where I finalized the affidavits Marcus had asked for. I typed up every key memory. The day she asked for access to our investment accounts under the guise of curiosity. The time she called Scott from the guest bedroom while claiming she was on a PDA call. The night she canceled our anniversary dinner to attend a book club meeting. I included financial moves she had no business initiating, like transferring $15,000 from our joint account to a savings account she'd opened without telling me, or requesting a second appraisal of the lake house behind my back. I documented everything down to the dates and times. At 10:15 p.m., I scanned the signed affidavits and sent encrypted copies to Marcus and Darren. Then I opened a secure cloud archive and uploaded every digital file I'd collected so far. Recordings, emails, screenshots, surveillance footage, and annotated documents. I named the folder Project Safeguard. I had 3 emails waiting. One from Marcus, confirming the transfer of key liquid assets into the newly established irrevocable trusts. Another from Darren, attaching the updated tax strategy memo. And a third from one of the forensic accountants I'd contacted 2 days earlier, informing me that Linda had made 9 separate credit transfers over the last 6 months, totaling just over $47,000 to an account that wasn't in either of our names. The account name? Scott M. Halverston. My son-in-law. My daughter's husband. The man who once asked for my blessing before marrying Melissa now had his name on hidden funds that were bleeding out of my accounts. My jaw tightened as I replied, thanking the analyst and instructing her to prepare a full breakdown of the timeline for use in court. With evidence like this, not only could we establish financial misconduct, but we could also challenge the credibility of any spousal support claims they intended to file. At 8:05 a.m., I placed a call to Tom Bradley, president of First Midwest Bank and my golf buddy of 15 years. He picked up on the second ring, cheerful as always until he heard the tone of my voice. I asked him to schedule a private meeting in his conference room for that morning. No staff, no interruptions. By 9 a.m., I was seated across from him at the heavy oak table, laying out the broad strokes of what I had discovered. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. Tom knew me well enough to take this seriously without probing for personal details. I handed him a file containing the necessary authorizations and told him I wanted a full temporary lock placed on all joint accounts, investment withdrawals, home equity lines, and shared credit facilities. No funds could be moved without dual signatures and in-person identity verification. You understand, I said, that this is precautionary, not punitive. Understood, he replied, flipping through the forms. We can initiate these holds today. Notifications will go out within the hour. It'll slow things down for her, but it's all above board. Just be prepared for her reaction. I am, I said, standing. I want her reaction. At 11:47 a.m., the locks were active. By 12:03 p.m., my phone buzzed with the first alert. Linda's debit card had been declined at Riverside Cafe, her usual Thursday lunch spot with 2 women from her wine club. At 12:08 p.m., a second alert confirmed a failed online transaction attempt through one of our shared credit cards. I smiled slightly, then walked in my noon meeting with the city planner like nothing had happened. At 12:50 p.m., my phone rang. It was Linda. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, she called again. I answered with the same calm tone I always used. Hey, everything okay? Frank, she said, flustered and trying to mask the edge in her voice. Something's wrong with the accounts. My card just got declined at lunch, and when I called the bank, they said there's some sort of security hold on all joint access. Did you do something? I paused just long enough for her to feel the silence. A security hold? That's strange. Did Tom say what triggered it? No, just something about needing in-person ID and verification. It's embarrassing, Frank. I was with people. I'll look into it, I said flatly. Probably just a glitch. Can you do it now? She asked, pressing harder. I've got errands, and I can't even get gas. I'll try to call Tom after my next meeting, I said. Should be done by 3. Okay, she replied, voice tighter now. Thanks. I ended the call without waiting for a goodbye. I didn't call Tom. Instead, I went back to work, and by the time I returned home at 5:45 p.m., the message was clear. Linda had felt the first tremor beneath her feet. While I walked into the kitchen, she greeted me with exaggerated normalcy. Dinner half prepared and wine already open. Rough day, she asked, studying my face for tells. Nothing I couldn't handle, I said, hanging up my jacket. You, Zama, Shelit. Ran a few errands. Had a strange issue with the bank, but I'm sure it'll sort itself out. I nodded, neither confirming nor denying anything. After dinner, she lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, making more noise than necessary, clearly waiting for me to offer reassurance. I didn't. Instead, I excused myself to take a work call and went back into the study to check the cloud dashboard where all financial notifications were being logged in real time. In addition to the failed transactions, the bank had logged 3 attempted login overrides from Linda's IP address and 1 failed password reset on our home equity line. She was trying to find a way around the wall I'd built, but she didn't know I'd reinforced every corner. Meanwhile, Scott had tried to access the hidden account that had been receiving her $47,000 in stolen transfers. The same forensic analyst tracking the account had set an alert on his access attempts. He tried to transfer out $15,000 that afternoon and failed. My investigator, Mike Rodriguez, called at 7:15 p.m. Thompson's law office has been buzzing, he said. But it was Melissa. Dad, can we talk? Something doesn't feel right. I responded immediately, telling her to come by the office in the afternoon. I couldn't be sure what she'd noticed, but if Linda and Scott were involving her in any way, I needed to know. The morning passed in a blur of calls and contract reviews, but my attention was split. By the time Melissa walked into my office at 3:12 p.m., I had already cleared the room and closed the blinds. She looked anxious, like someone carrying a weight they couldn't explain. I offered her a seat, and she declined it at first, pacing in front of my desk with arms folded tightly across her chest. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. I nodded and leaned back in my chair, trying not to let the tension show. Has Mom been acting different around you lately? She asked. Like she's watching you? Or testing your reactions? I raised an eyebrow and said carefully, why do you ask? Melissa hesitated, then sat down, finally deciding she couldn't dance around it. Because she's been calling me a lot. Not about normal stuff. She's asking about you, about how the business is structured, who handles your accounts, who you've been meeting with. It doesn't sound like concern. It sounds like fishing. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the folder labeled Timeline Behavioral Evidence and slid it across the desk to her. What I'm about to show you doesn't leave this room, I said. She nodded, still clearly unsure what to expect. I pressed play on the audio recording from earlier in the week, the one where Linda and Scott detail their entire plan, complete with timeline, asset division strategy, and commentary on how oblivious I supposedly was. As the audio played, Melissa's face went pale. Her lips parted in disbelief as she heard her mother's voice laugh and dismiss me as a fool. Then Scott laying out how he would file the papers and manipulate the legal system to bleed me dry. I watched her crumble in slow motion. By the time the recording ended, she was shaking. "They've been planning this?" she asked, voice barely audible. "They've been planning this behind your back and using me?" I nodded once, and they thought I'd never figure it out, that I'd roll over quietly and let it happen. Melissa wiped her face, angry tears brimming in her eyes. "Scott said you were acting paranoid. He said you were going through a phase. He even asked me questions about whether you'd ever made irrational decisions or had issues with memory." I clenched my fist beneath the desk. "They're setting up a case for incompetence," I said. "They're not just going after the assets. They're trying to destroy my credibility in the process." She nodded slowly, the weight of it settling over her. "And Mom, she used me. She tried to turn me into a witness against you." "I'm sorry," I said, voice tight. "You deserve better from both of them." "So what now?" she asked, fire building behind the betrayal. "Do you want me to confront them?" "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. You're the last person they expect to break ranks. Let them think you're still in the dark. But I do need one thing from you. Anything. Documentation. Every text, every call, every message where either of them brought up the business, finances, or questioned my behavior. I need a full record. Unedited. I have some already," she said. I thought it was strange, so I saved everything. "Good," I said, pride creeping into my voice. "You always were the smart one." That night, after she left, I updated the case file with her contributions. Her messages filled in blanks I hadn't even known were missing. Phrases Scott had used that lined up with court manipulation strategies, odd questions Linda had posed, and timestamps that matched financial activity I had flagged with Darren. My daughter was no longer just a bystander in this war. She was a weapon they didn't see coming. At 10:37 p.m., I received a message from Melissa. "Dad, I read through the rest of your folder. If you need me to testify, I will. I won't let them rewrite this story." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back, "Thank you. Just be ready. The storm's not over." The following day, Linda acted like nothing had changed. She kissed my cheek, asked about my meetings, and even offered to drive by the office with lunch. I let her, watching her play the role with perfection, knowing full well that every word out of her mouth was strategy. She was still trying to confirm what I knew and how much I'd uncovered. I gave her nothing, but I watched her every move. She'd underestimated me for years, and now she was underestimating our daughter too. At dinner, she brought up Scott, saying he was stressed and overworked. "He's been such a support to me lately," she added with a calculated glance. I nodded. "Good for him. I'm glad you have someone to lean on." She studied me, but I didn't blink. After dinner, I stepped outside and called Mike Rodriguez. "It's time to tighten surveillance on Scott," I said. "He's going to make a mistake. I want to catch it the moment it happens." "Already ahead of you," Mike replied. "He's scheduled a private dinner tomorrow night with a woman who's not Melissa. I'll have photos for you by morning. Send them straight to my cloud archive," I said. "No texts, no paper trail. You got it." I sent the full photo set to Marcus and instructed him to prepare an anonymous legal packet, one that would be mailed to Linda's address from an outside state. That packet would contain the pictures, a printed copy of the recorded conversation, and an unsigned letter claiming to be from someone who felt Frank deserved the truth. I didn't want her to suspect me yet. Let the discovery rattle her. Let it make her question Scott's loyalty. Let it fracture their trust from within. But I didn't stop there. I made my next move at 10 a.m., calling an emergency board meeting for Coal Petroleum's Executive Council. Everyone arrived within the hour, concerned but compliant. I stood at the head of the polished table, flanked by Darren and two outside council representatives who had been briefed in private. Effective immediately, I announced, I will be restructuring the ownership distribution of our subsidiary holdings. Certain trusts and investment vehicles will assume partial control for estate planning purposes. A few executives exchanged glances, clearly curious about the timing. I went on, "This does not affect your equity or decision-making capacity. It's purely a legal maneuver for asset protection. You'll receive official documentation before the end of the day." What they didn't know was that the new ownership vehicles made it almost impossible for Linda to argue she had any legitimate claim to my business holdings. I had built this company long before our marriage, but I was cutting off even the illusion of access. By noon, the legal packet had been mailed. By 2, Linda had received it. She didn't say a word to me when I walked through the door later that afternoon, but her silence was louder than anything she could have shouted. I watched her pace the kitchen, phone clenched in her hand, wine untouched. Her eyes kept darting to me, then away. She was unraveling. At 6:07 p.m., she made a call from the sunroom, whispering, thinking I couldn't hear her. But the baby monitor Melissa had dropped off for future grandkids was already set up in that room and paired with my phone. I heard everything. "Scott, we have a problem," she hissed. "I got something in the mail, photos, recordings someone knows." He paused, then asked, "Do you think it was Frank?" "No, it came from out of state. But someone's watching us. And if these photos get out, we're screwed." "Calm down," he said. "It's probably a bluff." "It's not a bluff, Scott. You were kissing her in public. And the letter, it mentioned the business and the divorce plan. Everything we said in Melissa's house." "Then we need to speed things up," Scott replied. "We file next week, surprise him, force a settlement before he can react." Linda didn't answer. I could feel the tension through the monitor. She was no longer confident, no longer in control. That night, during dinner, she barely touched her food. I waited until we'd finished eating, then stood to clear the plates and said, "By the way, I got an interesting letter today. No return address. Just a warning about someone close to me. Said I should watch my back." Her fork clinked against the plate. She looked up sharply, eyes wide. "Really?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. "What did it say?" I shrugged. Didn't read it. Burned it in the fireplace. I smiled and carried the plates into the kitchen, leaving her frozen in place. Let her sit in the paranoia. Let her stew in the fear that I knew more than she realized. The next morning, Marcus filed a motion to update my will, removing Linda as a beneficiary and placing all major assets in the names of the newly formed trusts. We also added a stipulation that any party who contested the will after my death would automatically forfeit their claim. It was airtight. That afternoon, I took Melissa to lunch under the guise of Father-Daughter Day. We sat by the river at a quiet seafood place where no one knew us. I updated her on everything: the photos, the surveillance, the board restructure. She was stunned but proud. "They have no idea you're this far ahead," she said. "Let's keep it that way," I told her, "until the day I decide it's time to go public." That day came sooner than expected. At 3:38 p.m., I got a call from Tom Bradley. "Frank," he said carefully, "Linda just came into the bank asking questions about the trust transfers. She seemed agitated. Did you give her anything?" I asked. "Of course not. But she's going to come to you. Be ready." At 4:05 p.m., she stormed in my home office, holding a copy of one of the public filing notices I deliberately allowed to reach her. "What the hell is this?" she asked. I looked up slowly. "That's the legal restructure of my holdings. Perfectly within my rights. You moved everything out of our estate," she hissed. The annual Coal Petroleum Foundation Gala had always been her crown jewel. For years, she chaired the committee, posed for photos with local officials, and gave speeches about legacy and community as if she weren't planning to rip ours apart. But this year, I had taken full control of the guest list, the speeches, the donation acknowledgments, everything. I had even arranged the seating chart myself. When we arrived that evening, she was dazzling in a champagne-colored gown she'd bought 2 months ago, back when she still believed the future was hers to carve up and keep. She kissed a few bored wives on the cheek, posed for photos with the mayor's wife, and leaned into her role like it hadn't been shredded beneath her. Meanwhile, I watched the room fill with people she thought were her allies, all of whom had been given early access to a carefully redacted summary of everything she and Scott had done. I had left names off the documents, of course. I wasn't there to make legal accusations. Not yet. I was there to make an impact. The presentation was scheduled for 8 p.m. sharp, right after dinner. Linda had insisted I let her introduce the keynote speaker, but I'd told her the order had changed and that I would be giving a short speech instead. She smiled, strained, but accepted it. At 7:58 p.m., the lights dimmed and I took the stage. My voice was steady. My eyes scanned the crowd, lingering just a second longer on Melissa, who sat near the front with her arms crossed and face unreadable. Ladies and gentlemen, I began. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the Coal Petroleum Foundation. When we launched this effort, we had a simple goal: give back to the communities that helped us grow. But along the way, I've come to realize that legacy isn't just about money or buildings or plaques. It's about integrity, about what we choose to protect, even when no one's watching. A few polite nods followed, and I clicked the remote to advance the slideshow on the projector. At first, it was standard fare: images of our scholarship recipients, our environmental cleanup projects, our local donations. But then came the pivot. Tonight, I said slowly, I want to talk to you not as a businessman, but as a man who's learned something painful, something that many of us don't see until it's too late. I want to talk about betrayal and how sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who are the most convincing masks. The room shifted, murmurs bubbling just beneath the surface. I clicked again. On the screen now was a redacted legal document, a fabricated divorce strategy email with identifiers removed, listing asset seizures, mental fitness arguments, and timelines for coordinated legal filings. What you see here is part of a real document, created not by a stranger, but by someone I trusted in my own family. More gasps now, people exchanging looks. In the back corner, Scott stood frozen, and beside him, Linda's smile cracked into a trembling half expression that couldn't decide whether to stay or run. I didn't stop. These tactics, documented betrayal, gaslighting, manipulation, are not just abstract legal chess moves. They are acts of calculated destruction, and I won't let them define my legacy. I turned toward the crowd. If you've ever been blindsided by someone who claimed to love you, you know what I mean. But here's the thing. I didn't come tonight to ask for pity. I came to show what it looks like to stand back up, to take your life back. I clicked once more. The screen faded into a photo of me and Melissa, taken just 2 days prior, standing in front of a new trust office building downtown, the logo freshly installed. This is the future, built not on deception, but on truth, on people who still believe in honor, even when it's inconvenient. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing. I stepped off the stage and walked back to my seat while Linda sat there unmoving, eyes fixed forward, wine glass untouched. People avoided looking directly at her. Scott had disappeared somewhere during the second half of the speech, and I knew he was likely trying to get ahead of what was coming next. But he was too late. The news would spread faster than he could contain it. Within 24 hours, a carefully crafted statement would go out to our investors, clarifying that Coal Petroleum was undergoing a legal restructure for asset protection and estate transition due to compromised internal relations. There would be no accusations, no lawsuits yet, just consequences. Back at the table, Linda turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and whispered, "You humiliated me." I leaned in just slightly and whispered back, "No, you did that all by yourself." I just turned on the lights. After the event, Melissa rode with me in silence. When we pulled into the driveway, she finally spoke. "You didn't just beat them," she said. "You buried them in their own dirt." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The morning after the gala was the kind of stillness that doesn't come often in life, the kind that settles after a storm has passed, where you wake up not wondering what will happen, but knowing what you've already decided. I walked downstairs just as the sun lit up the east wall of our kitchen. Steam rising from the coffee pot I'd set to brew at 6 a.m. Linda was already there, barefoot and pale, sitting at the counter in the same robe she'd worn for years. But now she looked like a stranger in it, like someone who had snuck into a life she no longer belonged to. Her eyes darted to the envelope in front of her. She hadn't opened it yet, but she knew. She always knew when something wasn't under her control. I poured a cup of coffee, stirred in 2 sugars, and sat across from her without saying a word. Finally, she broke the silence. "You really did it." I sipped quietly, then replied, "I only finished what you started." Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up the envelope. "There's no way back from this." "There wasn't after you made that call with Scott," I said. "You crossed that line before I even knew one existed." She opened the envelope slowly, carefully, like it might bite. Her eyes scanned the pages: petition for divorce, evidence exhibit list, formal asset reallocation, legal witness declarations, all printed in precise legal language that no amount of performance could twist. "You're going to ruin both of us," she muttered. "You already ruined us. I'm just refusing to let you drag me with you." I replied, "You don't get to claim victim after forging the knife." She folded the papers neatly, set them back in the envelope, and for the first time in 30 years, I saw no manipulation in her face, only absence. It was as if the mask she wore had finally dissolved, leaving behind the hollow person who had once worn it. "And Melissa?" she asked, her voice fragile. "She knows," I said. "Everything." She closed her eyes slowly, breathing in through her nose as if trying to contain all the things she wanted to say, but knew better than to speak. I stood up, coffee still in hand. "The movers will be here Monday. I'll be staying at the lake house until then. You're welcome to remain here until the transfer finalizes. After that, we're officially done." She didn't reply, and I didn't wait. I walked out the front door, the morning air cold against my skin, and drove without music, windows cracked just enough to let the wind carry away what little of her still clung to me. At the lake house, I opened the windows wide and let the pine-scented air roll in. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet that heals. I unpacked the bare essentials: suits, books, tools, the hand-carved wooden box I'd made for Melissa when she was 10. She'd call me that afternoon, asking if I wanted to meet for dinner. She said she wanted to bring Ella, her daughter, my granddaughter, who'd been asking why Grandpa looked sad on TV. I told her I wasn't sad. I was finally awake. That night at dinner, Ella climbed into my lap and told me she made me a picture. It was a crayon drawing of a man standing in front of a house with big windows and trees, with the words "Strong Grandpa" written in the sky. Melissa watched me read it and said quietly she drew that before the gala. I swallowed hard and kissed the top of Ella's head. After dinner, Melissa walked me to the truck. "I'm proud of you," she said, "for all of it. You didn't just stop them. You showed everyone what it means to not give up on yourself." I nodded, not because I needed her approval, but because I finally believed it. Back at the lake house, I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon and watched the sun sink beneath the water. My phone buzzed twice. One message from Tom Bradley saying, "Press coverage is calling it bold." Some even say inspiring. The other from Rodriguez. "Scott has filed a complaint, but without access to your financials or Melissa's cooperation. He's dead in the water." I turned off the phone and set it aside. Let the noise go on without me. I had said what needed to be said. I had done what needed to be done. Linda would have to face the world she built with lies. Scott would eventually be disbarred. or worse. But that wasn't my story anymore. My story now was peace. My story was walking through fire and not letting it burn the good parts. And when I stood the next morning at the edge of the lake, watching the fog rise in gentle waves, I realized something simple, something I hadn't let myself say before. Some endings are not tragedies. Some endings are mercy. Some are just the final act of self-respect. And sometimes, when you finally let go of what's been poisoning you, you don't collapse, you breathe. So, if you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever loved someone who handed your heart to someone else and smiled while doing it, let me tell you this. You are not weak for loving them, but you are powerful beyond measure when you choose to walk away. Don't wait for them to change. Don't wait for them to apologize. Don't wait until you're hollow and tired. Because the second you reclaim your dignity, they lose the ability to rewrite your story. And trust me, there's no better feeling than being the one who decides how it ends. The end. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if you've ever trusted someone only to find out they were smiling while planning your downfall, then I'd love for you to hit that like button and subscribe. I've got more stories just like this, and your support keeps them coming. What did you think about how it ended? Were you surprised when my own daughter stood by me instead of her mother? And how about that gala night? Did you see it coming? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I read everyone,